How do you get experts to work for you when you can't afford to pay them cash? This happens all the time in startups. And today, in this podcast, we're going to go over numerous examples of how you do that, how you get experts motivated enough to work for you without paying them monetary compensation. Welcome to the morebusiness.com podcast. My name is Raj Khera. I'm your host, and I'm joined today by Guillermo Sohnlein, who is an expert at helping you figure out how to get people to work for you. So Guillermo, welcome to the podcast today.
Thanks for having me, Raj. Great to be here.
Yeah, this is a topic that I think many companies can relate to, many startups can relate to. And so let's figure out how you actually get people motivated enough to work for you. So what are some of the initial thoughts you have on like what would inspire someone to work for you without you paying them monetary compensation?
Well, I think the very first issue to deal with is actually inherent in how you phrase that question, because you use the word inspire. And I think that's the huge difference. I think if you're asking somebody to do something, I don't know, mundane or, something that otherwise would be considered a job, I don't think you'll have any success in getting anybody to do anything without getting paid.
Yeah.
But if it's something inspirational, something fulfilling, then it's obviously a lot easier. And like one example I came up with, I'm not a lawyer, but I actually went to law school, but if I was starting a law firm and I wanted to get other lawyers to come work with me for free, chances are I'm not going to be able to get anybody to come in and work for me for free. But if what I'm trying to do is set up a project where we're providing free legal services to victims of a natural disaster or something like that, right? Now that's a little bit more inspirational, more fulfilling, and chances are I'll be able to get somebody to come work for me for free. So it's not a good fit for everybody or for every situation or for every venture, but there's always a way of tweaking something so it sounds much more exciting and unique and fulfilling and things like that.
I mean, in the example that you shared, it's basically helping inspire people because you were working on something that's bigger than you, bigger than them. It's a community thing, and people love to be part of a community. So that's certainly one area. When you're a startup, when you're struggling to find people who can help you because you cannot pay the $500 an hour for a lawyer, or you cannot pay all that expense for even, like advertising, where maybe you want to advertise in a publication. What are some of the ways you can get people to actually do that? I mean, like bartering might be one, right? So,
Yeah, well, even, I know we started with the whole inspirational thing, but sometimes it
mhm,
doesn't even have to be that, right? So
mhm,
especially in a startup setting, if you're a founder or an entrepreneur, you've got to be scrappy anyway. And
mhm,
that the first few investors you're going to have are probably going to be your friends and family. The first few customers may be people that you already know through your network. So one way to get people to help you for free is they just want to help you, right? You
mhm,
tap into your personal relationships, right? Maybe it's
mhm,
not inspirational. Going back to my example, maybe I am just setting up a law firm. Uh,
mhm,
but if it's, I'm asking personal friends or I'm cashing in, some favors that I did in the past, or it's, family or something like that, you can always do something like that. Um, and then, you mentioned something. Or barter. Or even before you get to barter, because I thought that was an interesting point you brought up. That
mm,
there's also other things you can offer. Like I've had, for example, I've had law firms offer to help some startup organizations that I've had for free, because they saw it as a way of getting their firm into a new market or into a
mm,
new niche or
mhm,
develop a new practice. So it wasn't anything inspirational or anything like that. And it wasn't personal relationships and there was no barter involved. But in a way, I guess there was barter because we were helping them do something that they wanted to do anyway.
mhm.
In a way, in that way, it almost looked like a sponsorship kind of
Yeah.
thing, right?
Yeah. There's a story I remember, Kevin Plank telling. He's the founder of Under Armour, and, he was actually trying to get one of the most famous baseball players to wear his, a uniform that was designed by Under Armour, um, to use it in a Sports Illustrated ad. So they could afford the ad, but they couldn't afford him because he was so
Oh,
expensive to
yeah.
be, sponsored, but they got him to do it for free. And the way they got it was they told him, "If you're in this ad, you are gonna be in Sports Illustrated in a full page ad. Think of what that's going to do for your personal brand. And that put it over the top. So they actually got, God, I wish I could remember which player it was, a really famous baseball player, but they got him to pose in their uniform. And sure enough, it built his brand, helped his image because he was in Sports Illustrated. And that worked
Wow.
out well for both companies or both
Well,
people. Yeah.
along those same lines, well, first of all, you just reminded me because over a few days ago, I watched the movie Air
Mhm.
about how Nike managed to land Michael Jordan.
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay, but that's a whole separate story. But you just reminded me of a personal anecdote. So years ago, I was starting a new organization, and we wanted to have a big event, a big public event. Uh, and it was going to be, let's just say, like a 1 day conference, mini conference kind of thing. And we wanted to make a big splash. We wanted a lot of people to show up. So we were thinking, how do we get people to show up? Well, it'd be nice if we had a keynote speaker or somebody who'd be a big draw, like like in our like if we got Elon Musk to come talk, right, or something like
Mhm.
that, we'd
Mhm.
have a lot of people show up because people wouldn't show up for this fledgling organization that nobody knew. So at the time, this was 20 plus years ago. At the time, one of the things that was making a big splash in the space industry was the advent of this concept of the private space astronaut or the space tourist.
Mm.
Dennis Tito had just paid like 20, $25 million to go up to the space station for 10 days there. And there were a couple of others who were kind of following suit. So I thought, well, maybe we could get one of them to come talk, one of these private astronauts. But that was going to be difficult. But what I could do was get Eric Anderson to come talk. Eric Anderson was the founder and CEO of a company called Space Adventures, which is the one that negotiated the deals with the Russians and with the space station and with the billionaires to go
Mhm.
up to the space station. So I thought, great, let's get Eric Anderson to come talk. He'd be a big draw at the time, 20 years ago.
Mhm.
Like, but how do I get Eric Anderson to come talk? Because he was doing interviews with like CNN, with like
Mm.
major media outlets. He was speaking at big conferences. He was never going to come talk at our fledgling little event. So I thought, well, what does Eric want right now? And one of the things that he wanted was more exposure, more media exposure for his business so that he could get more private astronauts to pay to go up to the space station. So I said, okay, great. How do I get more media exposure for Eric Anderson? And I thought, what if I could get a journalist to interview him on stage, like do kind of a fireside chat kind of thing?
Mhm.
So what journalist could I get that would make it worthwhile for Eric Anderson? And I thought, oh, Miles O'Brien. At the time, he was the science and space anchor for CNN. He's the one that covered all the shuttle launches. He covered all the air disasters, everything. So I thought, okay, so how do I get Miles O'Brien to come on? Well, it turns out at the time, Miles was wanting to figure out how he could get into space himself. And he wanted to find a way in to this whole private astronaut program.
Mm.
And I realized that Miles wanted to meet Eric and Eric wanted to meet Miles.
Look at
So
that.
I could
Yeah.
have just done it as an email intro somehow, but I didn't know either one of them.
Yeah.
So what I did is I did, the usual gamble chicken and egg thing. I reached out to Eric and said, hey, would you like to be interviewed on stage by Miles O'Brien? And then I reached out to Miles and I said, would you like to interview Eric Anderson on stage? But I sent those emails at the same time. And
Mhm.
fortunately, both of them got back to me at the same time and said, yeah, this sounds great. So now we had we had our keynote talk really that was going to form the core of this event. Fast forward, we ended up having like over 400 people show up for this event just so that to hear these two guys up on stage.
Yeah.
Now, the one thing that I did for both of them, though, I had to make sure that they got what they wanted is I had them show up an hour before they went on stage and I set up a room for them to just sit backstage and just talk with each other
Mm.
for an hour. So they didn't just get their time on stage. They got to spend quality time together and got to know each other. And I've talked with them a lot since then. And yeah, they've maintained that relationship
Yeah,
since
that's
then.
fantastic, and I love that you just took that leap of faith. You took a risk, and you sent a note to both of them. I have to ask, what would have happened if one of them said no?
I was going to have to, we were going to have plan Bs on both sides,
Yeah,
right? If Miles
yeah.
said yes, but it wasn't Eric. We were going to have to find somebody else.
Okay.
But at that point, though, we would have had Miles to
Yeah,
play off any other guests that we could
that's
have.
true.
On the other hand, if we had Eric and Miles backed out, we would have that to go to other journalists and bring them
Yeah,
on.
very true.
And
Yeah.
we would have had to play that game, but
Yeah.
hey, fortunately it worked out. Both of them said yes.
It
So
worked out, and I gotta tell you, it's the kind of the way the universe sort of aligns when you just really, really want something to happen and you put it out there, stuff sort of happens. I know that's what I've experienced in my life, too. Let's talk about some other ways to help, get startups moving, faster. So, so let's say somebody just needs services to just kinda help with marketing or with sales or something like that. What are some of the talking points people could use to inspire or get other people to just help them out, for free. So we've gone beyond the family and friends route. Maybe they don't need to take such a big leap like the event that you mentioned. Maybe it's just something basic to get them going. What can they do to inspire people?
so first of all, I think the one thing I've learned over the years is you have to be realistic on how much you can expect from people for free,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
There's just a point where after you just can't ask anymore without entering into a more traditional business transaction kind of relationship. Number
Mhm.
one. Number two, you also have to be careful of asking people to do for free what they actually do for a living.
Yes.
Right. So
Yes.
going back to a lawyer, right? If you're asking a lawyer to draft contracts for you, well, that's normally what they do for a living. If you're asking a lawyer to just give you some, you know, legal advice just to hear you out over 30 minutes on the phone, they may be more willing to do that.
Mhm.
But if you have them, do research and draft contracts and all that stuff, that's probably a step too far.
That's correct.
Um,
Yeah.
so I think that's one thing to keep in mind. And then short of that, or with that as context, um, I've always tried finding a way of giving them something that they value, even if ultimately they don't get paid. So obviously, one thing you could do is just structure it as a different kind of business transaction where you defer payment or, if you can give me some services for free up front and then we start billing after, like in the lawyer example, you give me the first 5 hours for free, but then you start billing me after that. Um, and one thing that they get is if you're in an interesting space or you're an interesting technology or you're about to get some venture backing or something like that, they may do that kind of as a loss leader to guarantee you as a client once you can pay. Or you could also structure it creatively as a business transaction. I think you mentioned earlier, maybe offering them equity or something like that, some other kind of compensation. Um, but short of that, there may be other things that they may be interested in. Like I said earlier, maybe getting into a new practice or getting into a new field,
Mhm.
getting to do something unique and different. Like you were mentioning, marketing. Maybe if you've got a new app or something and it's
Yeah.
something different that they've never marketed before, or they've got some junior people that they need to put on a project who aren't currently billable. They're not currently billing right now, and they're
Yeah.
looking to keep them busy. And this is a good self-contained small project that they can work on that gives them some experience with clients and it gives them
Yeah.
a, and then always keep in mind, I guess the one thing to keep in mind through this entire conversation is beggars can't be choosers, right?
Yeah.
So you do have to figure out how much what you're willing to take from somebody for free,
Yeah.
which may be short of your actual expectations of what you actually want. But
Yeah.
that's a whole separate thread of this conversation. But yeah,
I'll tell you, one of the things that, irks me to no end is, a lot of companies will come to me and they tell me that, "Hey, look, we're a startup," but the way they phrase it is, I tell them, "Oh, this is what it would cost to do a full SEO campaign, all the research and everything like that," and I don't discount my time because I know what my time is worth, and, and some of these companies will come back to me and say, "Oh, come on, we're a startup. Can you just give us a discount?" And my answer is no, and I actually declined them really fast. And the reason is the way they approached the request for the discount was so off-putting. that like some of the questions they might ask is, oh, I could tell that they didn't even research the free stuff that I give to people. And it was just like, just help me, help me, help me. I'm so poor. I can't do it. If you come across with that attitude, nobody's going to want to work with you. Nobody's going to work with you.
Yeah,
They
exactly.
want to work with somebody who's going to take their advice and champion it and really use it. And so, like, for example, I've got a really deep article on technical SEO versus content SEO. There's a difference, and I provide examples of each that people can use and model for their own. Very popular article. So when someone comes to me and says, "Oh, can you please do the work for me?" Uh, no, I can't. It's so simple like that. Now, flip that on the other side. If I get somebody who's like, "Look, I really loved your article on this topic. I have a few questions. Do you have a few minutes to clarify something for me?" I'm open. I'm open. You have access to, you know? So I think that's, the way you approach someone, really key in, getting them to work with you.
Yeah, and I think it really is building a relationship, right? So like
Mhm.
even like you just said that, they initially it's the way you gave the example. Initially, it's like gimme, 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 right? Like
Yeah,
this is
right.
what I need.
Mhm.
The other way is more maybe a little bit catering to your ego, which is like, hey, I read your article. This is great stuff. I
100%.
have a couple of questions.
Mhm.
Then from there, you agree to do, I don't know, 30 minutes for free and you give them some advice and all that stuff. And then they come back to you later and say, hey, those 30 minutes were great. You gave me all this great advice. We implemented almost everything that you said. That this is going really well. We still don't have the money to engage you, but is there any way that we can get, from where we are to, a full engagement? Is there anything that we can do?
Guillermo, I
You know,
love what you just said, because what you said is you reminded people to say thank you.
yeah,
And there's so many times that I've had the situation where I'll give someone, like, a piece of my time, and I could just tell based on their eyes lighting up and all this other stuff that I've now exposed them to, that they actually are ready to implement everything, but then there's 0 follow-up, there's no thank you, you know? And so if they came back to me, I'm like, "You're kinda all take and no give, right?" And
right,
again,
right.
you don't wanna work with people like that, so really, when you're that
E-
startup.
Even
Yeah.
little things like in your example there, right? Even little things, if even before they did the second ask, right? They said, hey, that 30 minutes you gave me, that was great information. We implemented a lot of the stuff. Even if they said something like, we're having like an all hand meeting or something, or we're having an offsite or whatever, would you like to join us just so you can meet the rest of the team? Like, even if they're just
Mhm.
inviting you to like meet the team,
Yeah. Yeah.
and make you feel like you getting to know them, and you may end up giving them more services for free or
Yeah.
whatever. I don't know,
Yeah.
but it's all
Uh,
about building that relationship. So
that relationship is so key. I know there's several times that, companies will contact me and say, "Hey, look, we have a marketing meeting every month that's an all hands company meeting that we talk about marketing, we talk about sales, and we like to bring in guest speakers to talk for 15 minutes about a specific topic. And you're an expert in, like, channeling B2B marketing for SaaS companies. That's what we are. Would you be open to talking to our team for 15 minutes on a Zoom call?" I don't know anybody who said no to something like that.
right,
You know?
yeah,
And quite frankly, that gives the person that you're trying to talk to an opportunity to share their expertise, and they're almost, able to sell what they've got to, their entire company. Oftentimes, you could say something as simple as, "Hey, thanks for listening, when you're on this call. If anybody wants to connect with me, please reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm open to connections there." So then you actually expand your network,
yeah.
that way too. So I think those are some key ways.
Well, so on the flip side, that's exactly what I just did. Even I think it was 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago. There's So right now, one of the things that I'm working on is I'm co-founder of a company called Humans to Venus, with a long-term vision to, it's basically a space-focused venture studio, but with a long-term vision of having humans living in the Venusian atmosphere. Okay,
Mm,
that's a whole separate conversation. But the point is um, that I'm currently co-founder and CEO of this company that's based on space stuff. And there was about 3 or 4 weeks ago, there's a global virtual event where the organizers were putting together this event. It was an education focused event. So most of the audience was going to be students with some educators in the audience as well. And they asked me to be one of the speakers. And I thought, well, sure, but I don't know what I'm going to talk about, whatever. But then I realized as part of my fundraising effort for the company, one of the things that I wanted to do, I thought would be good to do would be to create like a 30-minute video that kind of gave background on the company or the founding of the company. So that way I didn't have to go through all that stuff during my investor pitch. I could just point the prospective investors to this video, have them watch the video, and then I focus my investor pitch on the investor pitch. So I thought, oh, great. Well, they're going to be recording this virtual event. If they let me spend those 30 minutes talking about the founding of this company, which they agreed to do, then that's a win-win for both of us, right? They get a speaker for their event, and we actually did it, and it was great. But then I also get a 30-minute recorded video specifically that I can use for my fundraising. So we each got something out of it. I guess it goes back to your comment about bartering. You know, we really were bartering, but it was something where we both got something out of it, even though I didn't get paid for my time or anything like that. So,
The bartering, there's several angles to bartering that I think a lot of people overlook. And so one is the clear one-on-one exchange for services or products. That's kind of basic, right? But there's another angle to this, and that is if you have something that the person you need services from does not want, what do you do? Well, what you could do is ask them, do you know other people that might want services like mine? And you could offer them a gift card or something to say, I'll tell you what, I will give 3 hours of my time to anybody that you want in your community. You could give it to one of your clients if you don't need our services. And that actually helps them too. So I think, to your point, the core is to really look at what's in it for them. Because if you make it about you, yeah, it's not really exciting for people. But when you make it about them and how it will benefit them, I think that will help also.
and sometimes those two sides of the equation, it may not be clear to you at the moment. Like you may not be able to put your finger on exactly what that person might need. And you may or may not even know what you need specifically. Like even when you were talking about, even with your example of SEO and all that stuff, that's assuming somebody knows they need SEO. But some
Right.
people may come across you just because you know how to help them market their business. They may not even know what SEO is at the time, right?
Right. Yeah.
Um, so, so like, for example, a few years ago, I was co-founder of a company that designs, builds, and operates deep diving submersibles. So we have 3 subs, each carries 5 people. One goes 300 meters, one goes 500 meters, and one goes 4,000 meters. And we use that 4,000 meter sub to do annual science expeditions to the wreck of the Titanic. Okay,
Hmm.
that's all fine. But back like 10 plus years ago, we only had the first sub that only went 300 meters. And, um, and I don't know why, but I had a feeling that it would be good for us if we had an astronaut come and be part of the team somehow and dive in one of the subs. Because for us, it always felt like going underwater was like going in space. It just seemed very similar.
Hmm.
But like, how do we get an astronaut to come dive with us? You know,
Yeah.
I don't know. So I went to an event where an astronaut was one of the keynote speakers, a guy named Scott Parazynski. He did 5 shuttle flights, 7 spacewalks. He's in the Astronaut Hall of Fame. He's also summited Mount Everest. So
Hmm.
at the time, he was one of the only people who had both been in space and summited Mount Everest. So he was giving a talk about his life, but mostly about going into space and summiting Mount Everest. So I made sure that I sat in the front row because I knew as soon as they were done, as soon as he was done, he was going to get just
Completely
flood
mobbed.
mobbed by
Yes.
everybody. And there were like
Right.
200 people in the audience. So I sat in the front row. And as he was finishing up, I made sure that I had my business card with me. And as soon as he finished, I jumped on stage. And the first thing I asked him, I said, "Hey, this is all cool, but have you ever dived in a sub?" And his eyes lit up and said, "No, I've never, but I've always wanted to." So I handed him my card and I said, "Call me and we'll make it happen." And
Yeah.
then I walked away and then he got mobbed and he's
Yeah.
getting mobbed and he's like, wait, come back, come back. And it's like, and I'm walking away. And sure
Yeah.
enough, he reached out. Long story short, not only did he dive with us, now he's on the board of directors of our company.
Hmm.
Um, but at the time, I didn't know exactly what I needed from him. I just knew we had to have it might benefit us to have an astronaut involved with the company somehow. And
Hmm.
I took a gamble. I did research him, but I knew that he never really dived in a sub before, but I took a gamble that he'd want to dive in a sub. Right.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and
So
so
that's a
that
calculated
had some,
risk. There's a
yeah,
calculated risk, right? It wasn't
exactly.
like you randomly went in and just said, "Oh, hey, can you help me?" You actually researched him, and while you didn't know all the stuff that he might be able to help you with, you knew enough to kind of tease it. And I think
Yeah.
that's a key thing. You were prepared.
Which goes back to what you were saying before, right? If anyone reaches out to you, it helps if they've Googled you, if they've researched you, if they've read what you've written, if they've
Yeah.
listened to your podcast, it's something. You can't
Hmm.
just go asking for people to do stuff for free, right?
Yeah.
You gotta do some work.
Yeah, right. Now there's that other side of it, which we touched on earlier, which is the equity component. And so I know with, most small businesses, there's not really an incentive because like the multiples of an exit are not going to be super high. Tech, very different. You and I have both been involved in tech ventures. And so for that sometimes get people excited. And I love how you framed that you can actually, if you can help somebody get into a market that's exciting that they haven't been into before, that can actually give them incentive to work with you. Quick story. When I was building morebusiness.com many years ago, we created all kinds of content, but I needed more content. And one of the things I thought would be useful would be an employee handbook that's just people could copy, download, and use as an employee handbook. However, we had lots of legal caveats on it to make sure that, look, this is just an example. There's state laws you've got to pay attention to. And I needed to find an attorney to actually draft something that was generic enough, again, with all the disclaimers that people might like. So I'm looking around, then these companies are, oh, well, we'll charge you for it. You can't republish it, all kinds of other stuff, the very traditional way of doing legal business. And I found one lawyer, and this is when the dot-com boom days were just getting started. And he's seeing all these other people start these companies, start these websites, and he just wanted to be a part of it. He didn't want a ton of money. He didn't want any money, quite frankly. He just wanted to be a part of the movement. And he was just thrilled to give us a stock agreement that we could put on our site, with his name and branding, which we were happy to do. And suddenly we had this super cool agreement that was one of the first on the internet for sample employee handbooks, and people would download it. And again, we focused on what he wanted and how it aligned with what we needed. Same thing with the Under Armour baseball story. There's lots of ways you can skin this cat.
Yeah, yeah. So the one
Yeah.
thing on equity though, and again, let's backtrack because a little bit ago, I said we've both been saying the same thing. That if you can probably get people to give you stuff for free, but you've got to work for it, right?
Mhm.
You can't just ask for it or demand it, right?
Yeah.
And expect it. Um, to the point where I've gotten to the point where I almost feel like if you have budget to hire somebody, it's almost cheating because it's not really sales. You're not selling anybody there. You're just kind of like, hey, I've got $10,000 budget to hire somebody to write my employee handbook. Which one of you wants to do it? Okay, fine.
Yeah.
Um, so it is work. So when you think about equity, it's the same thing. If you're going to offer equity to, let's say, a lawyer or a marketer or something, you've got to remember that now you're asking them to invest in you, right? So now you got to treat them like an investor, not like a service provider.
Yeah.
Now you got to treat them like an investor, and you've got to convince them that you're a good investment, which means that you have to approach them just like you would any other investor, which means you have to research them now, not as a service provider, but as an investor. Who else have they done equity deals with? Have they had success with doing equity work for startups? As you mentioned, on the tech side, there could be a high return, but there's also high risk. So I know a lot of law firms and marketing firms and stuff that, especially years ago, did a lot of equity work for startups, and they got zero because they all
Right.
failed and they got
Yeah.
nothing out of it. So you've got to treat them like an investor, not like a
Mhm.
service provider. So now you're selling them, and
Yeah.
and 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 it does completely flip everything. You can't just all of a sudden say, "Well, how about if we give you equity?" And you should almost like you should feel lucky that you're going to get an ownership stake in our company because we're so cool.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I think like keeping the person who's giving you that free advice or help in mind is really important. I've actually had situations where someone there was a company, it was a startup. and they really needed free advice. And I said, okay, I think you got something cool here. I'm happy to share some of my time. And I helped them craft a really a well-designed marketing plan, go-to-market plan to go. And so the key was they needed somebody to execute on the plan. And so they ended up hiring somebody and paying good money for this person to execute, which they completely fell flat on their face. And I told them, well, what you probably need someone to manage a higher level person to manage someone who hasn't really done all these things before. Uh, so what really it kinda, like, got me a little upset that they spent all this money on the lower level person, but they, for some reason, looked at my services as, "Well, we got Raj for free for that time, let's just," and then they had the nerve to call me back and ask me for, like, more free advice, and I just
Yeah.
said, "No." And
Yeah.
so I think, that whole thing about really, like, looking at who you're talking to, what kind of things that they're actually giving me, and looking that as a potential invest, because for me, I was investing in that company because,
Yeah.
there was the option of, potentially getting stock and everything like that. And I thought, "Oh, no, I'm not gonna invest in this company because I don't think they're running the company right." Like, their values are completely skewed. Like,
Yeah.
"Let's get as much stuff we can get for free at super high levels, and then we'll pay for all the grunt." Like,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, that's a little backwards. So, yeah.
Well, on a related thread, because we're talking about startups and entrepreneurs, um, and we've mentioned this a couple of times, is you've got to remember that you're building a relationship with the person, with an individual person. It's not with the company. It's not with anything like that. And sometimes, like even in the example you just gave, you may, because you're potentially looking at this as an investment, you take your investor hat, and sometimes as an investor, you like the idea, but you don't like the founder, or there's a mismatch, or you like the founder and you don't like the idea.
Mm.
Now, if you like the founder and you don't like the idea, you may still end up giving free services to that because you want to build that relationship with the founder and vice versa. So I'm going to give you an anecdote and I'm going to call out someone by name. I know you're in the DC area. And I'll give it with a lot of caveats. So 20 plus years ago, when I was also in the DC area, Mike Lincoln was an attorney at
Yes,
Cooley,
Cooley. Yeah,
and he's one of the top lawyers in the DC area. Has worked with a
absolutely.
ton of startups over the years, and even back then, he was already a hot shot lawyer working with startups. And I had a startup, and I wanted to work with Cooley. I wanted to work with Mike. So built a relationship. He I don't know how it happened, but I think he was just looking to build relationships with solid entrepreneurs in the DC area. So he took on the startup that I had. He ended up, and now I can't remember the specifics, and hopefully I'm not going to get him in trouble because this was 20 years ago. But you know, we didn't get a bill for like 3 months. Then when I finally got the bill, he didn't charge us for like half the stuff that they did for us. And then what he did charge us for, he discounted all of his rates by like 50%. And they gave us payment terms on the whole thing. Right. So I didn't even ask him for any of that stuff. But I think he was looking to build relationships, and it worked because for that startup, I don't think we ended up paying much of those bills because we ended up not being able to raise the next round of funding. But for the next three startups that I did in there, we had Cooley as our law firm
Mhm, mhm.
because we built that relationship. So
Yeah,
I think from the entrepreneur side, it's a matter of finding the right service provider, and building a relationship with them. And from the flip side, it's having service providers that are uh, focused on long-term relationships more than just transactions for
right.
specific services at a specific time.
Yeah, relationships, not transactions. That is a key,
Yeah.
key component, and I think that's a great way to close out this podcast. Guillermo, thank you very much for all of your insights and examples, and I hope everyone listening got some takeaways about how you can actually leverage what you have to get what you need without having to pay financial compensation. Thanks again. To see you next
Thank you.
time.